always fun to have from Tacticalbassin guys. Please welcome Tim Little and Matt Allen.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. How's everybody doing today? We really appreciate you guys coming out. It's awesome to have this kind of a turnout. We appreciate every one of you. We appreciate you guys watching the videos throughout the year, interacting with us. Makes all the difference. How many of you guys, first off, do watch the videos? Quite a few of you? That's awesome, man. That is awesome. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, you're going to be very familiar with from watching the videos. You're going to see some of the baits that are tied on. We're literally in the videos this week. I mean, these are rods we took out of the boat and came down here to tell you how to catch these fish. What we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit differently this year. I don't like doing the same seminar twice. So I thought what we would do this year is instead of just telling you how to catch big fish, generic info, how to throw a swim bait, when to throw it, where to throw it. Instead, what I'm going to tell you is exactly what we are going to be doing on our boats for the next 4 months. I'll walk you through exactly what we're doing. You can turn around and go do it yourself, and it is going to work. Or you can wait, watch the videos over the next 2, 3, 4 months, and you're going to see us doing these exact things because it really does work. This is how we're going to be fishing this spring. So we'll be starting with smaller, more finesse style baits and working our way up to the giant baits for the next half hour, 40 minutes or so. Show you exactly what it is that what we're going to be doing, what we're doing now, how you can do it. So right off the bat, what you need to understand about Northern California is that it's very different than the rest of the country. That's key, because when you watch information that's out on the internet, a lot of it will still apply, but some of it will not, because most of the country has stable water, and that is something that we do not have. In the springtime, we have huge water fluctuations. You guys know that. We had giant blowouts in the springtime. The lakes turn chocolate milk. They rise quickly. That makes us very, very different, and you need to know how to fish those changes. So first and foremost, when you're out there on the water, you need to pay attention to clarity. And right now, for the next, let's say 2 to 4 weeks, because we never really know when those giant blowout storms are coming in, when you're on the water, you need to be looking up at the shoreline. You need to be watching what's up there, because 2 or 3 or 4 weeks from that, that's where you're fishing. The water is going to rise. It rises every spring, so you want to watch that shoreline above where you're fishing today to see where you're going to be fishing tomorrow, because that will be very, very relevant information in the very short-term future. So right now, if we go out and get on my boat tomorrow, you're going to see 3 baits. First one's going to be a finesse jig. Very small jig, light wire, double tail grub. We're going to fish that bait fairly slow on the bottom. I generally just bump it along. I use a little double hop once in a while to get those fish to chase after it. If you ever watch a crawdad that's on the bottom, it'll just sort of crawl along. But when it goes to make a run for it, they never just bolt. They always pop up and then run. That's how they do it. They kick up and then they kick away. So a good double hop can mirror that really, really well and get those fish to go. And again, we're going light. This is a finesse jig. It's a very, very small hook. I'm only throwing it on 12-pound line. And the reason why right now, we're just starting to get color in the water, but we're still fairly clear. And because that water is still cold, most of our lakes are somewhere in the high 40s to low 50s for water temps. The fish in that cold water, they're not that strong. They're not as strong as a summertime fish, as a warm water fish. So you can get away with much lighter line. And again, we're talking about how to catch the biggest fish. I'm not going to talk to you about how to catch numbers today. I'm going to tell you exactly what we're throwing to catch the biggest fish when we go out. So I'm going to lighter line because the biggest fish are the smartest fish, and they're not going to bite on heavy line if that water is still clear. So light line, a light hook, and you will be fine because those fish are not that strong yet. Fish that jig slow. It's very, very effective. How many of you guys have seen us throwing these jigs in like the last 2 weeks in the videos? Yeah, I mean, we're very serious about it. This works. You can do this. And it will catch little fish, but when you come across a giant, it's the right meal. It's still a crawfish. They will take a shot at that. Second bait is going to be the underspin. A little underspin. You can fish it weedless or an exposed head, depending on the cover that you're fishing around. We typically fish these very, very slow, crawling bottom, and then once in a while we'll give them a little bump. And you know, the funny thing about bumping these baits is they don't even look that good when you bump them. They just sort of flutter. But if that fish is keyed in and following that bait, when you give it that little bump, they smack that thing. These two baits, the jig and the underspin, are the two baits that I will focus my time on for at least the next 2 to 3 weeks, or until we get that giant blowout storm. Now the third bait, the third thing that I recommend throwing is the A-rig. And I've never talked to you guys about the A-rig on the tank before. And the reason why is that everybody talks about the A-rig, right? So why are we going to talk about it? But the reason why I want to talk to you about it today is that, to be honest with you, the biggest fish on my boat last year came on an A-rig. In fact, 3 of the 5 biggest fish on my boat last year came on an A-rig. So you can't ignore it. As much as we love to throw big baits, we love to throw swim baits, throw big glide baits, you can't argue that an A-rig is a very, very productive option, especially early season. What I like about the A-rig right now is that it is a very transitional bait. In the cold water that we've still got right now, you can still get some fish to eat it, but it's also a very clear indicator of a changing bite. If you throw an A-rig and you catch 1 or 2 on it, you know that they're not ready to fire yet. They're not ready to make that full transition into the pre-spawn. But if you throw it the next day, and you throw it the next day, and the next day, and all of a sudden you've got a day where you get 25 bites on this thing, that tells you it's go time. Those fish are, sorry, is that the hook? That's just a pure reaction thing right there. I can't help it. That tells you right away that these fish are moving straight into the pre-spawn, whether the weather's dictating or not. It's time, the moon is dictating it, and they're going. Now the A-rig, how you fish it is everything. If you go out and you throw an A-rig on heavy wires and heavy braided line, you will catch fish. I mean, they eat it. It gets a gut reaction out of these fish. But if you're careful, if you use rigs that are designed just for this lighter wire, you can see when I'm fishing that bait that I pulse it. So now granted, I'm doing it more in a short tank. Normally we'll only do this 2 or 3 times in a cast. Give that bait a double twitch, and those fish just open up on that thing. It's just a gut reaction. And that's key. That reaction is what I want all of you to focus on with every single one of these baits. Because getting a fish to fall for a bait is getting harder and harder and harder to do, especially a swim bait, because more and more guys are throwing them. I mean, how many people in here seriously own a Huddleston, as an example? Right, a ton. If we'd asked that 10 years ago, there would have been like 2 guys in the room and they wouldn't raise their hand because they didn't want anybody else to know about it. These baits are out there. Everybody's got them. Everybody's throwing them. Some people are throwing them wrong, which does more damage than a guy who does it right and catches a ton of fish, because it's educating the fish that it's not the real thing. So fooling a big bass is getting harder every year. But triggering a big bass will always work. See, bass have these core instincts, things that they have to do. They have to lash out when they're triggered. So if you focus on triggering, it doesn't matter that that fish has been caught on a swim bait before. It doesn't matter that that fish knows that what you're doing is not real. For that part of a second, its core takes over and it lashes out. And you can catch fish that literally are uncatchable fish. And that's what you want to focus your time on from here forward. This is not going to change. There's a lot of pressure in California. That's not going anywhere. It'll become more and more and more important to trigger those bites rather than wait for a fish to just fall for it on their own. So fish that A-rig, fish it on lighter line. 15 or 20 pound leader, softer rod, going smaller heads, lighter wire. This one's a G-Funk A-rig. These guys right over here, really, really light wire. It's bronze wire instead of silver, so it doesn't flash. It's all those little things add up to looking different than the next guy. so that when you go and you trigger that bite, those fish lash out. That's the difference. I hope that makes sense for you guys. And all this stuff, when we're done, we're going to go over to the Red One booth, which is straight across from here. You can look through our gear. You can ask us questions. If you want to see what the differences are in tackle, you're welcome to look through all our stuff. We don't mind at all. So that's the next few weeks. That's how we would approach it. What do we do after that? If nothing changes, if we don't start getting blown out by the storms, we get closer and closer and closer to the pre-spawn. And we start adding in the LV500. A lot of you know what that bait is, lipless crankbait, but specifically we add in that lipless crankbait. That bait just has a way of getting a reaction. I went ahead and took the hooks off this one just in case one of these big ones just decided to gulp it, because they've got a funny way of doing that. So we won't have an issue with this one. But this bait, we're not talking traditional lipless fishing. None of this chuck it out and reel it back. I'm talking a very, very slow, methodical approach right on the bottom. How many of you guys saw the blade bait video that we did? Was that yesterday? The blade bait video, we fished this the exact same way. Really slow, right on bottom. As the water gets warmer, you get a little more aggressive, single hop or a double hop. But this will trigger a bite. Again, triggering a bite. We're not trying to fool one of these fish. We're trying to get them to just lose their mind for a second, long enough to get hung up on that hook. They love these things. This is a great, great transitional bait. Right when that A-rig really starts popping, when you start getting a lot of A-rig bites, this is another bait that you can turn to and you'll just start loading them. And the funny thing about that lipless is that it gets giant bites. Right? We're not talking about a 12-inch swim bait. We're talking about a little tiny, tiny bait, 2.5-inch bait, but it's big ones that eat it. There are so many double digits caught on this thing every year on Clear Lake, on the foothill reservoirs, all over the place. Some of the lakes are talking about it, some of them aren't, but it's working all over the place. That's a bait that you want to pay attention to. Now, what do we do when the storms come in? Because you know they're coming. They're going to come in, they're going to blow out the lake, go shallow, move up shallow. As soon as they start blowing out, we're going to change our baits. And I'm going to do a little retying while we're talking here. But as soon as they blow out, what that's going to do is completely reposition the fish. The water is going to go chocolate milk. It's going to rise very, very quickly. Right now, our fish are typically on the outside structure. They're going to be sitting out on the ends of points. They're going to be out on the rock. They'll be on rock walls, fast access to deep water. Obviously, that's not where they're planning to spawn. So at some point, they need to make the move. Here where we all live, the signal for that move is that flood of water. When we get that chocolate milk flowing into the lake, overnight, those fish are on the move. I mean, how many of you have been out there on that bite, and then all of a sudden that chocolate goes, and it's just over? Your fish are gone. Well, the good news is they really are gone. It's not that you're doing something wrong. They vanish. The reason why is that's when it's time for them to make the move to the shallows. So what they're going to do is they're going to flood the bays. If they're out on the points, they're going to flood to the backs. If there's moving water, they are going straight to the moving water, and they are going shallow. Very, very, very shallow. Handful of ways to catch them in that muddy, muddy water. First one is still that LV500. Now it gets very, very tough to fish because you're up there in that new vegetation. Everything that was growing on the bank last week is now in the water. But you can throw it on a stouter rod than normal, and you can get it through. The number 2 bait is going to be that jig. We're going to a much stouter jig. We're going to a heavy hook. We're going to a flipping jig with a pointed head so we can get through cover. Because again, the stuff that you're fishing has completely changed. Now you're in the grass, in the brush, in the rock, right on the bank. And I'm talking 0 to 3 feet of water. We're not talking deep water. These giant, giant trout eaters in Northern California will abandon trout altogether in that chocolate milk. They leave it behind. They immediately turn to crawfish and everything else that's up in that field, and they get up there and they eat. And as that water rises, they follow it, and they eat, and they eat, and they eat, and just follow it and follow it and follow it. You cannot be too shallow. You focus on the LV, you focus on the jig. The swim jig is another great, great option. I'll tie that on here in a second. And then the spinnerbait. Now that jig, again, you want to fish that thing aggressively because you're in murky water. So you're going darker colors, bigger jig, stronger hook, make some noise with it, move that thing so those fish can find it. They're working off of vibration, they're not working off of sight. So if that bait's moving, they can track it down, find it, and they'll kill it. And when they eat that thing, they eat it in that muddy water. They're not gonna waste an opportunity, they're not going to miss, they're not gonna nip at the back of it, they are gonna thump that thing one time, and you need to be on them when they do it. And this is a great opportunity because, again, these fish are no longer, for a very short window, no longer trout eaters. I mean, not all of us, not even everybody sitting here loves throwing a swim bait. I'm sure some of you guys enjoy finesse fishing. This is that short window coming up somewhere in the next month where you have that real shot at catching that fish that only eats trout, only eats kokanee. It's going to have this short little time period where it will eat on the bottom, up in that cover, and you can fish for it without adapting, without throwing that swim bait. You don't have to do those things. So this is a great opportunity. And then here's that swim jig. The benefit of the swim jig is you can throw it right in the junk. I mean, it doesn't matter how thick that cover gets, that thing will plow right through it. Up, over, through, everything, right into those fish. And that is a very good bait for getting those bites. What the swim jig does is it bolts out. It's not just a bare swim bait. You've got that whole skirt pulsating. Again, in that murky water, we're working off of vibration rather than sight. So it creates a bigger profile, and that skirt is puffing. If you pair it with the right trailer like this, the skirt itself is puffing on its own. You're getting movement, you're getting rock. Those fish just hone in on that very well. And it's a bait that you can throw, again, anywhere. It does not matter how thick the cover is. And then you've got a giant hook and you can just horse them out. So again, a short window where you can fish this way, but you want to take advantage of it. As soon as our lakes blow out, and the funny thing is every year, everyone's uncomfortable in that chocolate milk because we don't have it most of the year. So that time period where it's really good, most people aren't at the lake. They drive to the boat ramp, they see that it's blown out, there's logs floating out there, and they go home. And the handful of guys that are out there are just slaying fish. So it is a time, even when it's thick, when that water's brown and nasty, you want to get out there, you want to be a part of that because it's a short window. So after that, now we're probably talking, if this is a normal year, we're probably talking early to mid-March now. That chocolate milk is going to start fading. Now every year is a little bit different. You know, we might have another storm come in and extend it, but if we don't, if nothing comes in, that's about the end of that window. We're going to start clearing. We're going to start seeing that clearer, warmer water. That is prime time. You think that muddy water bite is good, wait until what comes right after it. Okay, what's going to happen is that first round of little buck males, they're going to start to spawn. Depending on the lake, that can start as early as early March. It can go as late as mid-April, say full moon in April, that they'll make that move, just depending on weather. So you've got to be out there paying attention. But that is such a good opportunity because when those little bucks make that move, they get up on the bank, they start making beds. The females don't follow them. But what they do is they school up and they get together. And that is prime time. When those big females all start grouping together, that happens. Get this one over here real quick, get her back down. Get that one right back in there. So when these fish start schooling together, like they're doing in this tank, right? This was forced on them. But when they start to school together, they've got a schooling mindset, which is very different. Because a giant fish on its own is a smart fish, but a giant fish in a school of fish is as dumb as the dumbest member in that school. And what I mean by that is that single big one You're trying to approach that fish out there in that clean, warm water. That fish may or may not take a shot. You're trying to fool that fish, or you're trying to get that fish to react. But for that short window right before they move up onto the beds, when they're in a group like they're doing down there at the end of that tank, they'll set up on cover like that. You'll have a bare bank for a quarter mile and you'll find one dock that looks like that. When you find those fish, all you have to do is get the dumbest fish in the school to bite. So we throw a variety of baits. We throw the A-rig. One of my favorite baits to throw at them is the jerkbait. We'll go ahead and throw that on here. Another one is that LV500. Again, you're going to start throwing this bait in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and you're not cutting it off until the spawn. It's going to stick with you the whole time. Same with that A-rig. Unless that water blows out, that A-rig will stick with you the entire time. That jerkbait, the reason we throw that, because again, I'm sure a bunch of you thought we were going to sit right here and talk swim baits this entire time, right? We're talking about some different options, some ways that you can catch these fish. And enough of you have been out on trips with me to know this really is exactly what we're doing. These are the baits that we throw. This is the stuff we do to catch the biggest fish. Now the swim baits are coming. We are going to talk about that. But when these fish are schooling, the swim bait is a killer option, but there are some other options. This little jerk bait is one of the best things you can do. How many of you guys watched some of the underwater video that we did this last year throwing jerkbaits? Tons of you. And again, that is awesome. You guys are amazing. The jerkbait, as you've seen the underwater footage. These fish lose their minds over a jerkbait. Now, it's not always the biggest fish in the school that does it. It's not always the biggest fish that comes unglued after that bait. But if you fish that bait, stop and go, depending on water temp, that determines how aggressive you're going to be with that bait. You don't have to be crazy with it. Again, you're not trying to have this perfect, refined presentation trying to catch the biggest fish in there. All you're trying to do is get one fish to bite. I don't care if it's the smallest female and she only weighs 1.5 pounds, or you get a 9-pounder to bite. It does not matter. What you're doing is setting off the school. You guys have seen it in the videos. Once that first fish goes, once the commotion starts, all the other fish just change gears. They immediately pay attention. They get on high alert. They all start looking around. Their behavior is completely different. They follow the other fish around. If you can immediately get back in, and I mean this is critical, you want to pay attention, immediately get back in. The faster you get that fish off the line and you get another bait back down there, the better your odds. If you can put a bait right back in and get a second fish triggered, get a third fish triggered, what you're going to end up with is a school of fish that for a brief moment have just lost it. And then it's just a game of odds. The next time you're in, you get a 6-pounder. The next time you're in, you get a 2-pounder. The next time you're in, you get a 13-pounder. And you've got it on a jerk bait, on a bait that it never would have eaten if it was just out there by itself. That's the beauty of that short window, is you take these fish that are normally loners, that are very smart, they're wary, they don't make mistakes, and you put them in a crowd of smaller, dumber, for lack of a better word, fish that don't know what's going on, and they get caught up in the mix, and for just a second, they give you a shot, and you can absolutely catch the biggest fish in a school on a very, very small bait. Now, there are other options. You can go the big bait route because it does work in that same exact time period. The other two baits are going to be a soft bait, typically a more aggressive soft bait because your water is warming up, it's clearing up. This is the big Kitech. This bait didn't exist a year ago. So you already know that the fish this spring that are getting into wolf packs, when they're in a wolf pack, they've never seen it. They've never seen it in that environment because it wasn't out there a year ago. But a bait like this, or an osprey, there's a lot of these baits with that boot tail on them. The trash fish is another one. These baits will just get that fast reaction strike. And again, you're not trying to catch the smartest trout eater out on the end of a point that's super smart, that's seen 1,000 baits. You're trying to get one fired up in the middle of a school of fish. That's all you're trying to do. We'll tie on another one of these. This one, you guys remember last year we were talking about the JSJ, the 6-inch hitch. He just put out a weedless. Finally put out the weedless. But seriously, he's starting to get these into production. It's just another awesome option. You want options in the springtime because you've got that group of fish, you know where they're at, and until the weather or the moon changes, they're going to stay in that tight-knit school. So if you don't get them today, you come back and you've got a shot at them again tomorrow. They're not in a hurry. They've got nowhere to go until those beds are made. They're just sitting around. So you want a lot of different options that you can throw at those fish. The more natural can be phenomenal. Sometimes that wide thumping boot tail is the way you want to go. You want to have both on hand. But very, very simple to do. I mean, just slow crawl them. Don't be complicated about them. Just fish that bait. You already know where your fish are. Now, if you're in a lake, say you're not on Clear Lake, where we like to fish, you don't have docks as an option. Well, then what your fish are going to do is they're going to be out on the first break. The nearest fast access to deep water closest to where those beds are being made. So if the beds are up on a flat, right out on the end of that flat, that's where the school's going to be. If your fish are in the back of the pocket, they're probably going to be in the creek channel leading into that pocket. They're not far away. You can find them on any lake, any kind of cover. It does not matter. They will be grouped up together. Those biggest females will all stay grouped up together. And then the last bait that we're going to throw at them is the glide bait. Specifically, the bait that we throw for that is the waver. And we've talked about that many, many, many times. You guys know that. And you've seen the effectiveness. But those baits just flat get bit. You want to fish them aggressively. Again, we're trying to trigger that bite. So we'll fish that bait, slow roll for a handful of turns, and then get aggressive with it. Twitch it, rip it, try and draw that reaction bite. Now, if your water is really clear, if we haven't had a storm for a while, you'll slow roll until you see a fish show up behind that bait. Once they show up, then you can try and trigger them. If you're in that clear water and you see that that fish is 15 feet behind the bait, doing that slow follow, I mean, I know a lot of you have seen that, where you're crawling that bait and you look and there's a shadow and you're trying to decide if that's really a fish or not. And she's just kind of hanging back there. That's not the time to try and draw that reaction strike. That's the time to just continue that slow roll, because that fish is not close enough to draw a reaction. All you're going to do is run out of water. See a big one like that one that's following me, tailed back there, I'm screwing around clear up here at the other end. She'll follow, but she'll never get closer. But if that fish is a foot away from the bait, 2 feet away, 3 feet away from the bait, and you do that, you may get that fish to just come unglued for just a moment. Just one lash out. That's all you need. Just one mistake. Just flare on it, and it's over. You've got that giant fish that you've been looking for. So, we've talked now all the way up to the spawn. What happens next? Those fish go to beds. We're all for fishing for them. I mean, personally, I speak for myself. I love bed fishing. Some people love it. Some people hate it. It does not matter. It's up to you what you want to do. Bed fishing is a whole other animal. So today we're not really going to jump into the details of that. We're going to jump to right past that spawn. What do we do right after? Because in my book, at least on my boat, after that spawn is over, you've got one more shot. One more shot. Because once summer arrives, it's a different animal. Now, it's not that you can't catch giants. There's a lot of different ways to catch them. You can deep crank them, jig them, throw chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, all sorts of different things that you can do. You can still throw big swim baits. But before that happens, before they fully get out on those ledges, you get one more real shot. And you want to make it your best shot. So what we do is we go to the biggest baits and we give it our best presentation. And this, again, is going to start typically somewhere in early April. If you're on a lake that goes early, it might be earlier than that, but typically April, all the way through May, and this is going to work. It's like clockwork. There's no secret. This is going to work right up to the full moon in June. And the day after the full moon in June, you are not getting another bite. That is game. Those fish somehow know it's summertime, it's over, there should not be a trout up here, there should not be a kokanee up here. I missed my opportunity, I'm gonna go eat crawdads for the summer. You know, they just behave differently. But until that happens, that is your shot. This is a bait that we've never talked about before. This is the Explorer Glide. I don't know how well you guys can see it in the tank. Tim and I both picked these up a few months ago, and we got them in, took a look at that bait in the package, and went, I don't know. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. I let that thing sit in the package for so long. I finally took it out recently, and I was actually striper fishing on the day that we took it out. I pulled this bait out for the first time. It took 4 casts to catch a striper over 30 pounds. 4 casts, that's all it took. The action on this bait is phenomenal, you know, compared to very, very high dollar baits. You guys know, Tim and I love the S-Waver. We love it because it works. We love it because it's affordable. That's very important to us because, again, we're talking to the masses. We're not just talking to an elite group of guys with a never-ending wallet that can just buy anything, right? So we try to find those baits that work extremely well and people can afford to throw. And this is one of those baits. So this bait, again, you can throw it earlier in the year, you can throw it now, but prime time, as soon as that spawn ends, you've got that one more shot at catching a big one. We throw this, we throw that giant soft bait, throw all the big glides. This is that time. It's your last shot to fool that true giant before she vanishes for the summer. And again, the way we fish them, super slow. I mean, you can slow roll that thing forever. You want to let those fish just come up and get behind that bait. And then once they're behind it, you can twitch it and work it to try and draw a reaction out of one of those fish. Very simple to fish. I mean, glide baits, anybody can throw these things. If I could only give you one retrieve, if the water's not truly clear where you can't see your followers, and you could only have one retrieve, it's this easy. You throw that thing out, let it sink for a second so it's not right on the surface, and then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, twitch, twitch. 1, 2, 3, 4, twitch, twitch. If you do that every day all spring, you catch giant fish. I mean, you won't catch them every day, but you will run into a giant fish. It's that simple. It's just playing the odds and doing it long enough to come across one of those fish. Now, if your water's clear and you can draw those fish in and do it at the right time, at the perfect time when they're right behind it, your odds are even higher. But if you don't have that, if you're down here on the delta, if you're on one of the lakes right after the blowout where you don't have that clarity, that retrieve works extremely well. And then last thing that we're going to do is throw that giant soft bait. The bigger the better. Throw an 8-inch HUD. Throw a Batesmith Magnum if you've got them. Throw a 10-inch HUD. Throw something giant. There's 2 different ways to throw it. One is to fish it fast. The other is to fish it painfully slow. The painfully slow routine, that's what you already did all fall and winter. So sometimes you don't want to keep doing that. But it does work. And when we talk slow, I mean, we are talking painfully slow. Pitch that bait out. We'll do a retrieve here together. We'll pitch that bait out. We'll let it go to bottom. And we're going to go slow. And this, I'm going to back it up a little bit. This starts working clear back about October. And this will work all the way up until that full moon in June. Look at that fish coming in. Is she following that bait? I don't have a really good vantage point from here, but I can see that shadow. I mean, you just cannot go too slow. As slow as you can stand to turn that handle. I mean, can you guys see how slow this handle's going? And you see that fish is just tailing that bait. She's right behind it. That's the deal. As slow as you can stand. And what will happen is sometimes these baits, you're going so slow, especially when the water's cold, that the tail is not really even doing anything. Because guys ask all the time, how do you know if that tail's even kicking? I don't care if that tail's kicking. So slow, because what will happen is you'll be cruising along, Nothing, but there's a big one looking at it. And then you'll bump into a rock or you'll bump into a twig. You'll hit something and that bait will shimmy. And when that happens, they pound that thing. Now your other retrieve, if you're ADD, or if you already did this for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months and you don't want to do it anymore, the good news is this is also the time of year, warmer water, clearer water, going into summer, that you can fish these baits fast. You just chuck and wind that thing. Forget that you're throwing a swim bait. Don't even worry about it. Don't worry about getting in tight and casting out or setting out on the tip of a point and coming up the ledge. Forget all that. Go down the bank, throw the bait out, reel the bait back, pretend that it's a spinner bait or a deep crank or a square bill, and you just cover water because those fish are coming off the beds. They're in different stages. You've got fish that just finished the spawn. You've got fish that finished the spawn a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. They are fully in that mode. They're out on the ledges again. You start coming through there fast, one of them will lose their mind. Both methods work really well. So again, after that spawn, 2 presentations. The glide bait, fish it aggressively, fish it hard, trigger those bites, and then the biggest soft bait that you have. The biggest bait. Throw an 8-inch bait, a 10-inch bait, a 12-inch bait. Fish it slow or fast, either one, and those fish will lash out. Now, if you don't get it done by the full moon in June, I mean, again, there are a lot of things you can do in summer, but for the sake of this argument, hang it up. Save your time, have a blast, go pound a bunch of summertime fish, because you may run into a big one by accident anyway. Catch a pile of fish, throw a frog, throw a jig, throw a crank, and come October, start the process over again. And you'll get a whole nother shot at those fish. Because what will happen is a guy, again, the reason I want to give you that advice is that a guy will go out and he will beat his head on the wall October all the way to June. And for whatever reason, he does something wrong, or he misses that bite, or that fish comes off, or he breaks off. Come June, he goes into the summer and does it all summer long. By the time he gets back around to where odds are really in his favor, the last thing he ever wants to do is see another swim bait. So you've completely blown all of your confidence when it wasn't even the peak time to be doing it. So I really do recommend taking a break, doing other stuff, throw top water, have fun, and then come October, pick it back up and go a full nother round. And you will run into some of these giant, giant fish. I think we're going to end it there. We're going to cut this one a little bit shorter than we have in years past. The reason why is there's so many of you. We want the opportunity to talk to you guys. So I'll get down off the tank. Tim's back over here as well. We're going to slowly make our way straight across so we don't just crowd this place out for everybody else. The red one booth is literally dead across on the wall. We have some of our apparel over there. We can hang out with you, answer all your questions, anything you guys want. Come on over there and talk with us, and thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate it.